Most men think power is loud. They think it's the shouting in the boardroom, the gold watch on the wrist, or the trophy wife on their arm. Mark Sullivan made that mistake. He thought silence was weakness. When he handed his wife Bella the divorce papers after 10 years of marriage, he expected tears. He expected screaming. He expected her to beg for a monthly allowance. Instead, she picked up a pen, signed her name without a tremor, and walked out the door. He followed her to the parking lot to gloat one last time. That's when the valet pulled up in a vehicle that didn't just cost more than Mark's house. It was a car that didn't officially exist yet. And as Bella drove away, Mark realized he hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost the game he didn't even know he was playing. The rain in Seattle has a way of washing away everything but the truth. And on that Tuesday evening in November, the truth inside the Sullivan estate was ugly. Mark Sullivan, a senior partner at Vanguard Equity, checked his reflection in the hallway mirror. At 42, he was handsome in a predatory way. Sharp jaw, graying temples that suggested wisdom he didn't possess, and a tailored Brioni suit that cost more than most people's cars. He adjusted his tie. He was about to do something cruel, but in his mind, it was necessary. It was trimming the fat. He walked into the kitchen. The smell of roasted rosemary chicken and garlic mashed potatoes filled the air. It was domestic. It was comforting. It repulsed him. Bella was standing by the stove. She was wearing that faded grey cardigan she always wore, her brown hair pulled back in a messy bun. She was 39, but tonight, under the harsh kitchen lights, she looked older. She looked tired. To Mark, she looked like a relic of a past he had outgrown. "You're late," Bella said softly, not turning around. She was basting the chicken. "I had a meeting," Mark lied. The meeting had been with Chloe, his 24-year-old executive assistant at a wine bar downtown. Chloe was everything Bella wasn't, loud, ambitious, and obsessed with Mark's status. Mark tossed his briefcase onto the marble island with a heavy thud. The sound echoed in the large minimalist kitchen. "We need to talk, Bella." Bella paused. She set the spoon down on the ceramic rest. She wiped her hands on her apron and finally turned to face him. Her eyes, usually a warm hazel, were unreadable. "Dinner is ready in 5 minutes, Mark." "I'm not eating," he snapped. He reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a thick brown envelope. He slid it across the marble counter. It stopped inches from her hand. "I want out, Bella." Bella looked at the envelope, then up at him. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She just stared at him with a terrifying calmness. "Is it Chloe?" she asked. Mark blinked. He felt a flush of heat creep up his neck. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter who it is. The point is, I'm suffocating here. Look at you, Bella. Look at this life. You do nothing. You have no ambition. You sit in this house I paid for cooking food. I don't want wearing clothes from a thrift store. I need someone who matches my trajectory. Someone who shines." "You want someone who shines?" Bella repeated, her voice devoid of emotion. "And I am just dull. You're invisible, Bella. When I bring colleagues over, you fade into the wallpaper. It's embarrassing. I'm closing a deal next month with Thorn Dynamics, the biggest tech merger of the decade. I need a partner who can stand next to me at the gala, not a housekeeper." Mark felt a surge of power as he said the words. He had practiced this speech in the mirror. He expected her to shatter. He expected the hysterics that would justify his cruelty. Instead, Bella reached out and touched the envelope. "I see," she said. "And the terms, generous." Mark scoffed. "More than you deserve." You get the condo in the city, the 2018 Lexus and alimony for 3 years. I keep the estate, the portfolio, and the liquid assets. It's fair. If you fight me, Bella, I have lawyers who will make sure you end up with nothing but that cardigan. Bella picked up the envelope. She weighed it in her hand. Tonight, she said. What? Pack a bag, Mark. Go stay at a hotel, or go to Chloe's, but leave tonight. I will meet you at your lawyer's office tomorrow at 10 a.m. to sign. Mark was stunned. He let out a harsh laugh. You're kicking me out of my house. It's our house until 10 a.m. tomorrow, Bella said, turning back to the stove and turning off the burner. And I prefer to spend my last night here alone. The chicken is done. Take a plate if you want. But leave. Mark stared at her back. He felt a flicker of unease, a tiny scratch in his armor. This wasn't the reaction of a dependent housewife. This was the reaction of a CEO firing an intern, but he shook it off. She was probably in shock. She was playing tough. Fine, Mark sneered. Enjoy the silence, Bella. It's all you're going to have left. He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out. He didn't see the faint, cold smile that touched Bella's lips as the front door slammed. He didn't see her pull a sleek, encrypted smartphone from the pocket of her faded cardigan, a phone that cost $15,000 and wasn't available to the public. She dialed a number. It's done, she said into the phone. Bring the car around. Tomorrow. The Hyperion. The offices of Harrison, Spector, and Ross were located on the 45th floor of the Columbia Center, overlooking the gray sprawl of Seattle. It was a place designed to intimidate. The conference table was made of black mahogany, long enough to land a plane on. Mark sat at the head of the table, flanked by his lawyer, David Ross, a man known as the Rottweiler in divorce circles. She's 5 minutes late, David muttered, checking his Rolex. Typical. She's probably trying to find a parking spot for that old Lexus, or maybe she's getting cold feet. We can crush her if she delays Mark. She'll be here, Mark said, drumming his fingers on the table. He felt good. He had spent the night at the Four Seasons with Chloe, drinking champagne and celebrating his impending freedom. Chloe had already picked out new curtains for the estate. The heavy glass doors swung open. Bella walked in. Mark did a double take. She wasn't wearing the cardigan. She was wearing a simple black pantsuit. It looked plain at first glance, but the tailoring was surgical. It fit her perfectly. She wore dark sunglasses, which she removed as she sat down at the opposite end of the table. She was alone. "Where is your legal counsel, Mrs. Sullivan?" David Ross asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "I don't need one," Bella said calmly. She placed a single folder on the table. David exchanged a smirk with Mark. "She doesn't have a lawyer. This is going to be a slaughter." "Very well," David said, sliding the thick divorce agreement toward her. "As discussed, this document outlines the separation of assets. Mr. Sullivan is being incredibly generous. You are waiving your right to his future earnings, his stocks in Vanguard Equity, and the primary residence. In exchange, you receive the downtown condo." "I don't want the condo," Bella interrupted. Mark leaned forward. "Don't be greedy, Bella. You can't afford the maintenance on the house." "I don't want the house either," Bella said. She flipped to the back page of the document. "I don't want the alimony. I don't want the Lexus. I don't want your stocks." The room went silent. Mark frowned. "Then what do you want?" Bella looked him dead in the eyes. "A clean break. Effective immediately. I want my maiden name restored today, and I want you to sign a non-disclosure agreement, stating you will never discuss our marriage or claim any association with me or my future business endeavors. Mark laughed out loud. It was a booming, genuine laugh. Your future business endeavors. What are you going to do? Bella sell knitted scarves on Etsy. Sure, I'll sign whatever you want. If you're stupid enough to walk away with $0, that's your problem. David Ross looked concerned. Mark, we should review this NDA. Sign it, David Hall, Mark ordered. She's letting me keep millions. Who cares about an NDA? Bella produced a pen. It wasn't a cheap plastic biro. It was a heavy silver fountain pen with a nib that looked like black titanium. She signed the papers with a fluid, aggressive flourish. Bella Vance. She pushed the papers back. Mark signed them quickly, grinning like a shark that had just found a wounded seal. Done, Mark said, capping his pen. You're free, Bella. And you're broke. I hope it was worth it. Bella stood up. She didn't look at the papers. She looked at Mark with an expression that wasn't sadness. It was pity. You always underestimated the quiet ones, Mark, she said. Goodbye. She turned and walked out. Let's go, Mark said to David, jumping up. I want to see her face when she gets into that beat-up sedan. I want to see the regret hit her. Mark and David followed Bella down the elevator and out into the VIP valet circle in front of the building. It was a busy morning. Executives were arriving in Mercedes and BMWs. Mark caught up to Bella on the sidewalk. She was standing still, pulling on a pair of black leather driving gloves. Need a ride to the bus stop? Mark jeered. Or did you call your mum? Bella ignored him. She was looking down the street. Suddenly the air shifted. A low, guttural rumble vibrated through the pavement. It wasn't the high-pitched whine of a Ferrari or the roar of a Lamborghini. It was a deep mechanical growl, like a dormant volcano waking up. Heads turned. The valet captain stopped what he was doing. People on the sidewalk stopped walking. Around the corner, a car appeared. Mark's jaw dropped. He considered himself a car guy. He read Top Gear. He knew his cars. But he had never seen anything like this. It was low, wide, and aggressive. The body was finished in a matte, midnight purple that looked black until the light hit it. The aerodynamics were insane, active winglets, a rear diffuser that looked like it belonged on a fighter jet. There was no badge on the hood, just a stylized silver V emblem. What on earth is that? David Ross whispered. Is that a concept car? The car prowled up to the curb and stopped right in front of them. The engine idled with a menacing thrum that rattled Mark's teeth. The driver's side door scissor-lifted open. A young man in a chauffeur's uniform stepped out. He didn't look like a normal valet. He looked like private security. He walked around the car, ignored Mark completely, and stopped in front of Bella. He bowed his head slightly. "Good morning, Miss Vance," the man said. "The Hyperion is ready for you. Mr. Thorne sends his regards." Mark froze. Thorne. As in Silas Thorne. The billionaire recluse who owned Thorne Dynamics. The man Mark was desperate to impress to save his career. Bella nodded. "Thank you, James." She walked toward the driver's seat. "Wait!" Mark lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "Bella, what is this? Whose car is this? You're sleeping with Silas Thorne." Bella looked at his hand on her arm until he let go. "No, Mark," she said, her voice ice cold. "I'm not sleeping with him. I designed this car for him." Mark blinked his brain, unable to process the words. You designed a car. You don't know anything about cars. You're a housewife." Bella smiled. It was the first time she had truly smiled in years. It was sharp and dangerous. "You never asked about my degree, Mark. You never asked what I did before I met you. You assumed I was nobody. But in the automotive world, I'm not Bella Sullivan. I'm Evie, the ghost designer." She slid into the low bucket seat of the Hyperion. The interior was a spaceship cockpit of carbon fiber and digital displays. "This is the Vance Thorn Hyperion," she said, looking up at him through the open window. "Prototype 1, valued at $4 million, and I own the patent on the engine." She pressed a button on the console. The engine roared a sound so loud and powerful it set off the car alarm of a Porsche parked nearby. "You wanted someone who shines, Mark," Bella shouted over the engine. "Watch me burn." She dropped the clutch. The tires shrieked, smoking against the asphalt, and the car launched forward with G-force violence. In 3 seconds, she was a blur at the end of the block. Mark stood on the curb, inhaling the smell of burnt rubber and exhaust. The divorce papers were still in his hand. He looked at them then at the empty street. David Ross cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mark, if she owns the patent on that engine, and she just waived alimony, do you realize how much money you just let walk out the door?" Mark didn't answer. He felt sick. He had just thrown away a diamond because he thought it was a piece of glass. But the nightmare was only beginning. Mark drove to the Vanguard Equity headquarters in a daze. His hands gripped the steering wheel of his Mercedes S-Class, a car that 10 minutes ago represented the pinnacle of his success. Now, compared to the Hyperion Bella had driven away, and it felt like a sedated elephant. He stormed into his office, ignoring Chloe, who was sitting at her desk, applying lip gloss. "Mark, babe?" she chirped, standing up and smoothing her skirt. "Did you do it? Is the witch gone? I booked us a table at Le Cavalier to celebrate." "Shut up, Chloe!" Mark snarled, slamming his office door behind him. He collapsed into his leather chair and booted up his computer. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He typed EV Automotive Design. The search results populated instantly. Mark's blood ran cold. Article: The Ghost of Geneva. Who is the mystery designer behind the new Thorn supercar? Forum: Thread: EV Patents. The Hydrogen Hybrid Revolution. Industry Report: Top 10 Engineers Reshaping the Decade. He clicked on the first article. It was dated 3 years ago. While Ferrari and McLaren fight for the spotlight, a shadow figure known only as EV has been quietly filing patents that are making the big manufacturers sweat. Rumored to be operating out of a private facility in the Pacific Northwest, EV is the exclusive design partner for Silas Thorne's new automotive division. Their identity is the industry's best-kept secret. Mark leaned back, gasping for air. 3 years ago. 3 years ago, he had told Bella she was spending too much time in the garage, tinkering with her little drawings. He had forbidden her from talking about boring mechanical stuff at dinner parties. He remembered a night 2 years ago. Bella had come to him, eyes shining, holding a roll of blueprints. "Mark, why think I cracked the cooling issue on the intake manifold? It's huge." And what had he said? "That's nice, honey. Did you pick up my dry cleaning?" He hadn't just ignored her genius, he had actively suppressed it. She had been building an empire in the garage while he watched football in the den. His intercom buzzed. It was his boss, Arthur Sterling, the managing partner of Vanguard. "Mark, get in here. Now!" Mark straightened his tie, swallowed the bile rising in his throat, and walked to the corner office. Arthur looked grim. "The Thorn deal," Arthur said without preamble. "It's scheduled for Friday. It's the biggest merger in Vanguard's history. If we acquire the equity in Thorn Dynamics, our stock triples. If we lose it, we miss the fiscal projection, and the board will have my head. And yours." "It's in the bag, Arthur." Mark lied, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm meeting Silas Thorn on Friday to sign the letter of intent." "Good," Arthur said, eyeing him suspiciously, "because I heard a rumor that Thorn is bringing his silent partner to the negotiation table, the one who owns the IP rights. You better charm whoever that is, Mark. I don't care if it's a man, a woman, or a robot. You make them fall in love with you." Mark felt the room spin. The silent partner. Evie. Bella. He had to charm the woman he had just served divorce papers to. The woman he had called invisible. The woman who had just peeled out of the parking lot in a car powered by pure vengeance. He returned to his office. Chloe walked in, pouting. "Why were you mean to me?" she whined, draping herself over his desk. "I thought today was a happy day." Mark looked at Chloe. Really looked at her. She was pretty, yes, but her eyes were vacant. She had no substance. She was a garnish, and he was starving for a meal. "Get out," Mark whispered. "Excuse me." "I said, get out," Mark roared, sweeping a stack of files off his desk. "Leave me alone. I have to figure out how to save my life." Friday morning arrived with the weight of a funeral. Mark had tried to call Bella 40 times. Every call went straight to voicemail. He had driven to the estate, but the gates were locked, and a private security team, Thorn Security, was stationed at the entrance. He was barred from his own former home. He had no choice. He had to go to the meeting. The headquarters of Thorn Dynamics was a fortress of glass and steel, located in the tech district. Mark walked into the lobby with his team. He had brought David Ross, his lawyer, and unfortunately, he had to bring Chloe. As his executive assistant, she was required to take minutes, though he had strictly ordered her to not speak a single word. They were escorted to the Sky Room on the 50th floor. The view was breathtaking, but Mark was sweating through his shirt. Silas Thorn was waiting. He was a man of 60 with silver hair and eyes like flint. He sat at the head of a white marble table. "Mr. Sullivan," Silas said, not standing up to shake hands. "You're late." "Traffic," Mark stammered. "Mr. Thorn, it's an honor. Vanguard Equity is ready to—" "Save the pitch," Silas cut him off. "I'm just the money, Mark. I don't sign anything unless my lead engineer and head of design approves the partnership. This company is built on their technology." "Of course," Mark said, his mouth dry. "We are eager to meet them." Silas pressed a button on the table. The double doors at the far end of the room hissed open. Bella walked in. But this wasn't the Bella from the kitchen, and it wasn't even the Bella from the lawyer's office. This was a titan. She wore a white architectural suit that looked like it had been cut from marble. Her hair was sharp, sleek, and bobbed. She wore 4-inch stiletto heels that clicked rhythmically on the polished floor. She didn't look at Mark. She walked to the head of the table, stood next to Silas, and placed a tablet down. "Gentlemen," she said. Her voice commanded the room instantly. "I am Bella Vance, Chief Technical Officer of Thorn Dynamics." Mark's team gasped. David Ross dropped his pen. Chloe looked up from her phone, her mouth hanging open. "Bella," Chloe squeaked. The wife." Bella turned her head slowly. She looked at Chloe like one might look at a stain on the carpet. "Ms. Vance," Bella corrected her. And you are the assistant who can't operate a calendar, correct? Chloe turned beet red. Mark stood up, his legs shaking. Bella, honey, look, we need to talk. Privately. Sit down, Mr. Sullivan, Bella said. She didn't yell. She didn't have to. The authority in her voice forced Mark back into his chair. This is a business meeting. You are here to propose why Vanguard Equity deserves a 15% stake in my life's work. Well, Mark stuttered. He tried to engage his salesman mode, but his brain was short-circuiting. Vanguard offers stability. We offer capital. We have capital, Bella said, tapping the tablet. The Hyperion pre-orders sold out in 12 minutes yesterday. We generated $80 million in revenue before lunch. Why do I need you? Mark looked around the room. His colleagues were staring at him. They realized he knew her. They realized he was failing. Bella, please, Mark whispered, his voice cracking. Don't do this, not here. I know you're angry about the divorce, but... The divorce, Silas Thorne interrupted, raising an eyebrow. Is that true, Bella? Is this the man? He was, Bella said calmly. But as of Tuesday, per the agreement he drafted, we have no association. In fact, she picked up a document from the table. It was a copy of the non-disclosure agreement Mark had forced her to sign. Mr. Sullivan insisted on an NDA, stating that he has no claim to my future endeavors, and that we are strangers, Bella said, sliding the paper down the table. He was quite adamant that my work was, and I quote, knitting scarves on Etsy. He deemed my intellectual property worthless. Silas Thorne laughed. It was a dry, cruel sound. You thought the variable compression engine was knitting Mark what? Thought you did your due diligence. Mark felt the walls closing in. Bella, I didn't know you hid it from me. I worked in the garage next to your golf clubs for 5 years. Mark, she said quietly, you never opened the door. She looked at the Vanguard team. I cannot in good conscience partner with Vanguard Equity, Bella announced to the room. The decision-making demonstrated by your senior partner is catastrophic. If he can't spot a unicorn in his own garage, how can he manage $1 billion portfolio? I agree, Silas said. Deal is off. No, Mark shouted, standing up again. Arthur will fire me, Bella. You can't ruin my career over a personal grudge. Bella stepped closer to him. The smell of her perfume, something expensive and woody, not the vanilla scent he remembered, filled his nose. This isn't personal, Mark, she said softly, so only he could hear. This is business. You wanted to trim the fat. You wanted someone who matches your trajectory. I'm flying at Mach 2. You're still on the ground. She turned to security. Escort Mr. Sullivan and his assistant out of the building, and make sure they validate their parking. I don't want to pay for it. As the security guards grabbed Mark's arms, he looked back at her one last time. She wasn't looking at him. She was already pointing at a schematic on the screen, discussing torque ratios with Silas. She had already moved on. Mark was dragged into the hallway, Chloe sobbing behind him. But the humiliation wasn't over. As the elevator doors closed, Mark's phone buzzed. It was a text from his boss, Arthur. Get back to the office. Leave your badge at the desk. You're done. Mark stared at the phone. He had lost his wife. He had lost his job. And he had a sinking feeling that the public humiliation was just beginning, because next week was the auto gala, and he knew with dread certainty that Bella would be the star. The descent wasn't a slide. It was a free fall. In the movies, when a titan of industry falls, it's usually depicted with a single dramatic scene, a yelling match in a boardroom or a glass of scotch thrown against a wall. But for Mark Sullivan, the destruction of his life was a slow, bureaucratic torture. It happened in quiet rooms with air conditioning that was set too cold, accompanied by the rustle of paper and the clicking of pens. It started the Monday after the disaster at Thorn Dynamics. Mark arrived at Vanguard Equity at 8:00 a.m., intending to fight. He had rehearsed a speech about minor setbacks and pivoting strategies. He never got to give it. His keycard didn't work. The little light on the turnstile blinked a mocking red. "Mr. Sullivan." Mark turned to see the head of human resources, a woman named Janice, whom he had ignored for 10 years, standing with 2 security guards. She wasn't smiling. "We've packed your personal effects in this box," Janice said, handing him a cheap cardboard carton. "Mr. Sterling has initiated a forensic audit of your accounts. Pending the investigation into the misappropriation of company funds, you are barred from the premises." "Misappropriation?" Mark laughed, though it sounded like a bark. "I'm a senior partner. I have an expense account. If I bought a few dinners—" "It's not just dinners, Mark," Janice said, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut deeper than a shout. "The flights to Cabo, the jewelry purchases listed as client gifts that never reached any client, the lease on the apartment for your assistant. The board is calling it embezzlement. They are freezing your equity to cover the losses." Mark felt the blood drain from his extremities. The Cabo trip. He had taken Chloe there 6 months ago, telling Bella he was at a conference in Chicago. He had expensed it all under client acquisition. "You can't do this," Mark stammered. "My severance?" "There is no severance for gross misconduct," Janice said efficiently. "Please hand over your company phone and the keys to the Mercedes. We have a tow truck waiting." Mark stood on the sidewalk of the financial district, 5 minutes later, holding a box containing a stapler, a framed photo of himself and a stress ball. He watched as a tow truck hooked up his S-Class, the car that was his armor, his identity, and dragged it away into the morning traffic. He had to take a bus home. He hadn't been on a bus since college. The smell of wet raincoats and diesel fumes made him want to vomit. The silence of the Sullivan estate was different now. Before it was a peaceful silence, the kind that money buys to keep the noise of the world at bay. Now it was the silence of a tomb. For 2 weeks, Mark lived in a state of paralysis. He spent his days making frantic calls to headhunters who wouldn't return his voicemails. News traveled fast in Seattle. He was toxic. The man who blew the Thorn deal. The man who didn't know his own wife was a genius. And then there was Chloe. If Mark was the captain of the sinking ship, Chloe was the rat looking for the nearest porthole. The transformation was terrifying to watch. The bubbly, adoring assistant who hung on his every word had evaporated. In her place was a woman who was bored, angry, and increasingly cruel. One Tuesday evening, the reality finally crashed through the front door. Mark was sitting at the kitchen island, the same spot where Bella used to cook. He was staring at a stack of envelopes, red notices, the electricity bill, the water bill, the private club membership dues. "Why is it so cold in here?" Chloe complained, walking into the kitchen. She was wearing a silk robe he had bought her, but she looked at him with undisguised disgust. "I tried to turn up the thermostat, but it's locked or something." "I turned the heat down to 55, Mark muttered, not looking up. "We need to conserve. The gas bill was $400 last month." "55, Chloe shrieked. "Mark, I'm freezing. This is ridiculous. I can't live like this. I'm going to the spa. I need a facial to deal with this stress. She reached for her purse and pulled out the platinum credit card Mark had given her, an authorized user card on his personal account. Chloe, wait, Mark said, standing up. Maybe hold off on the spa today. Why? She narrowed her eyes. You said you were liquidating stocks. You said we were fine. I am liquidating. Mark lied. He was trying to liquidate, but the freeze on his accounts meant he couldn't touch a cent of his portfolio. It just takes time. Transfers take time. Whatever, she scoffed. I'm going. I'm not sitting in this icebox. She stormed out. Mark waited. He knew what was coming. 20 minutes later, his cell phone, a prepaid burner he had bought at a convenience store, rang. It was Chloe. It declined, she hissed. What? The card, Mark. I'm at the counter at Geneva Spa. There are 3 people behind me. The card declined. Insufficient funds. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? It's a glitch, Mark said, rubbing his temples. Just, come home. I had to pay with my own debit card, she screamed. My money, Mark. This is not what we agreed on. She hung up. Mark put his head in his hands. The final blow didn't come from Chloe, though. It came from the bank. The next morning, a black sedan pulled up the long driveway. A man in a sharp grey suit stepped out. It was Philip Corwin, a vice president at the bank Mark had used for 15 years. They had played golf together. Mark met him at the door, forcing a smile. Phil, good to see you. Come in for a drink. Philip didn't smile. He didn't step inside. He stood on the porch holding a leather portfolio. I'm not here for a drink, Mark, Philip said stiffly. I'm here about the mortgage. The mortgage is fine, Mark said, his smile faltering. I'm a month late, maybe. I'll wire the funds next week. You're 3 months late, Mark. We let it slide because of your standing at Vanguard. But since the employment termination, the risk assessment has changed. Philip opened the portfolio. We're calling the loan, Philip said. The house is leveraged against your Vanguard equity package. Since that equity is currently being contested in court by your former partners, the collateral is void. You have 30 days to pay the full balance of $2.4 million, or we begin foreclosure proceedings. 2.4, Mark gasped. I paid $1 million down on this place. You refinanced 3 years ago to buy the boat and the cabin in Aspen, Philip reminded him. You pulled the equity out. Mark, look at the numbers. You're underwater. The market has cooled. The house is worth less than the loan. Mark leaned against the doorframe for support. Philip, I need time. Just give me 6 months. I have a plan. I can't, Philip said, closing the folder. He looked at Mark, and for a second there was a flash of pity in his eyes. You know, Bella always warned you against that second refinance. She called me, actually, asked if there was a way to structure it so the primary residence was protected. You overruled her. Mark stared at him. Bella called you. She knew Mark, Philip said, turning to walk back to his car. She knew you were over-leveraging. She was trying to protect you from yourself. You didn't listen then. It's too late to listen now. When Chloe came home that evening, the house was dark. Mark hadn't turned on the lights. He was sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by boxes. He wasn't packing. He was just looking at the things he had accumulated. The imported vases, the 85-inch television, the absurd sculptures. It was all junk. Expensive junk that he didn't own. What is this? Chloe asked, flipping on the switch. The light was harsh. Why are there boxes? The bank is taking the house, Mark said, his voice devoid of emotion. We have 30 days. Chloe stopped. She looked at the boxes, then at Mark. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Her face went completely blank, like a computer screen entering sleep mode. "Okay," she said. "Okay." Mark looked up, a flicker of hope in his chest. "Babe, we can figure this out. We can get a small apartment in the city. I'll get a consulting gig. We can rebuild." Chloe walked to the closet, the massive walk-in closet Bella had designed, and pulled out her 2 largest suitcases. She threw them onto the sofa and unzipped them. "We aren't rebuilding anything, Mark," she said, her voice steady. She began grabbing armfuls of clothes, not the casual stuff, the designer pieces, the things he had bought her. "What are you doing?" Mark scrambled up. "I'm leaving," she said. "My sister has a guest room." "But I love you." Mark said the words, sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "You said you loved me." Chloe paused, holding a pair of Jimmy Choo heels. She turned to him, and her expression was chilling. It wasn't hatred, it was indifference. "I loved the life, Mark," she said honestly. "I loved the dinners. I loved the trips. I loved the way the waiters looked at us. But you're just a middle-aged man who talks too much about himself. Without the money, you're exhausting. You're a gold digger." Mark spat tears of rage, pricking his eyes. "And you're a cliché," she countered, tossing the shoes into the bag. "You traded a loyal wife for a trophy, and now you're surprised the trophy is expensive to maintain. Grow up." She zipped the bag. She walked to the door, her heels clicking on the hardwood, a sound that reminded him painfully of Bella leaving the boardroom. "Oh," Chloe said, pausing with her hand on the doorknob. "I almost forgot. I won't be needing a ride. I have a car coming." "Who?" Mark asked. "My new employer." Chloe smiled. It was a sharp, predatory smile. "I got a job today, in marketing. Entry-level, but the benefits are amazing. We're Thorn Dynamics," she said, savoring the words. "Apparently they're looking for people who understand the psychology of the luxury failure. I told them I had a front-row seat. Bella signed off on my hiring personally." Mark felt like he had been punched in the gut. "Bella hired you. She said I had potential to be useful." Chloe shrugged. "She also said I should tell you that the garbage runs on Thursdays, since you probably never took it out yourself." Chloe opened the door. Outside, a sleek black sedan was waiting. It wasn't a taxi. It had the Thorn Dynamics logo on the side. "Goodbye, Mark," Chloe said. "Good luck with the boxes." The door clicked shut. Mark Sullivan stood in the center of his cold, dark, foreclosed mansion. He looked at the empty space where Chloe had been, and beyond that, the ghost of the space where Bella had been. He walked to the window and watched the car drive away. He was completely alone. The silence rushed back in, heavy and suffocating. He realized then that he hadn't just lost his money. He had lost his audience. And for a man like Mark, who lived to be seen, that was a fate worse than death. He slid down the wall until he hit the floor, pulling his knees to his chest, shivering in the expensive, unheated air. The night of the annual Seattle Auto Gala, the sky broke open. It wasn't just raining. It was a deluge, a relentless sheet of freezing water that blurred the neon lights of the city into streaks of grey and blue. Mark Sullivan sat in his rental car, a 2019 Ford Focus that smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke and pine air freshener. He was parked 3 blocks away from the Museum of Flight in a dark lot under an overpass. He couldn't afford the valet. He couldn't even afford the parking garage next to the venue. He adjusted the rearview mirror. His face looked gaunt. The stress of the last month had carved deep lines around his mouth. His tuxedo, a Tom Ford custom piece that used to fit like a second skin, hung loosely on his frame. He had lost 15 pounds since the day the bank manager stood on his porch. "Showtime," he whispered to his reflection. But the voice lacked conviction. It sounded like a man trying to sell a lie to himself. He opened the car door, and the roar of the rain swallowed him. He didn't have an umbrella. By the time he walked the 3 blocks to the museum, his patent leather shoes were soaked through and his hair was plastered to his forehead. The entrance to the gala was a different world. A massive heated tent had been erected over the red carpet. Underneath the canvas it was dry, warm, and smelled of expensive perfume and anticipation. A line of limousines and supercars idled, depositing the elite of the automotive world. Mark stepped onto the red carpet, shivering uncontrollably. He tried to straighten his wet lapels. He tried to summon the arrogance of the senior partner at Vanguard Equity, the man who commanded rooms. But that man was gone. He approached the velvet rope. The head of security was a man built like a vending machine, holding a digital tablet. "Name?" the man asked, not looking up. "Sullivan," Mark said, his voice raspy. "Mark Sullivan. I'm expected." The guard scrolled through the list. His finger stopped. He looked up, his eyes scanning Mark's soaked tuxedo, his dripping hair, the desperation vibrating off him like heat waves. "I'm afraid I can't let you in, sir," the guard said. His tone wasn't apologetic. It was final. "Check again," Mark insisted, gripping the velvet rope. "I'm Mark Sullivan. My ex-wife, is the keynote speaker. I need to speak with her. It's urgent family business." "Mr. Sullivan," the guard said, his voice rising just enough to draw attention. "I have a specific flag on your name. Do not admit." The instructions come directly from the event chairwoman, Ms. Vance. She specified that if you arrived, you were to be removed from the property. The people in line behind Mark began to murmur. Mark turned and saw faces he recognized. There was Jonathan Peterson from Goldman Sachs. There was the VP of Boeing. People Mark had bought drinks for. People Mark had laughed with. They weren't laughing now. They were looking at him with a mixture of pity and revulsion, like he was a stray dog trying to enter a restaurant. Jonathan Peterson actually took a step back, shielding his wife from Mark's proximity. "Please," Mark whispered, his dignity crumbling. "Just 5 minutes." "Step aside, sir," the guard said, signaling to a uniformed police officer standing nearby. "Or you will be escorted away for trespassing." Mark stepped back. He stumbled slightly on the wet pavement, almost falling. He backed out of the warm tent and into the freezing rain. He couldn't leave. He physically couldn't. He had convinced himself that if he could just see her, if he could just make eye contact, she would remember the 10 years. She would remember the man she fell in love with, not the monster he had become. He circled the building. The Museum of Flight was a massive structure of glass and steel designed to showcase airplanes. At night, lit from within, it glowed like a lantern. Mark found a spot near the south wing. There were bushes here, thick landscaping that offered some cover. He pushed through the wet branches, thorns snagging his tuxedo trousers until he was pressed right up against the floor-to-ceiling glass wall. He wiped the rain and condensation from the glass with his trembling hand. The view took his breath away. Inside the great gallery was bathed in golden light. Suspended from the ceiling were historic aircraft, but all eyes were on the stage in the center of the room. And there she was, Bella. She was standing on a raised dais, illuminated by spotlights. She wore a gown of deep midnight blue velvet that shimmered as she moved. It was regal, It was commanding. Her hair, once pulled back in that messy bun he had despised, was now styled in sharp, elegant waves. She wasn't just participating in the event. She was the event. Mark pressed his face against the cold glass. He couldn't hear the music, but he could see the way the room gravitated toward her. Silas Thorne stood to her right, beaming like a proud father. Then Bella walked to a podium. A large screen behind her lit up. Mark could just make out the words on the slide, "The future of propulsion." She began to speak. Mark saw her lips moving. He saw her gestures, confident, precise. She pointed to something off stage. The floor rotated. A silk sheet was pulled away. The Hyperion sat there. Even through the rain-streaked glass, it looked alive. It was aggressive, beautiful, and terrifying. It was the physical manifestation of her genius, the genius Mark had called knitting. Mark watched the crowd erupt. He saw men in $5,000 suits clapping until their hands hurt. He saw women wiping tears. They were witnessing history. And then something happened that shattered Mark's heart completely. Bella finished her speech. She stepped away from the podium. A man walked up to the stage. He was tall, perhaps 35, with messy blonde hair and the rugged build of a field engineer. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a black leather jacket over a dress shirt. He looked out of place among the suits, yet perfectly at home next to Bella. He handed Bella a glass of champagne. He whispered something in her ear. Bella threw her head back and laughed. It wasn't a polite society laugh. It was a full-bodied, joyous laugh. She touched the man's arm, a casual, intimate gesture. The man looked at her not with the possessive hunger Mark used to have, but with total, unadulterated awe. Mark realized who he was. He had read the articles. This was the lead test driver for Thorne Dynamics. Her partner, in every sense of the word. At that moment, as if sensing a disturbance, Bella looked up. Her gaze traveled across the room past the applause, past the champagne, and locked onto the dark window where Mark was standing. Mark froze. His breath fogged the glass. She sees me, he thought. This is it. She sees me suffering. For a heartbeat, their eyes met across the barrier of glass and rain. Mark waited for a reaction. Anger, sadness, triumph. But there was nothing. Bella's expression didn't change. She didn't frown. She didn't smile. She simply looked through him as if he were a smudge on the window pane, a part of the background scenery. Then she turned back to the man in the leather jacket, clinked her glass against his, and took a sip. She didn't care. That was the bullet that finally killed Mark Sullivan. Hate would have meant he still mattered. Anger would have meant he still had power over her emotions. But indifference meant he had ceased to exist. He was a ghost. Mark peeled himself away from the window. The cold had seeped into his bones, making his teeth chatter violently. He turned and began the long walk back to the rental car. The rain was heavier now, washing away the hair gel, ruining the expensive shoes, soaking the tuxedo he would never wear again. He walked past the line of luxury cars waiting for their owners. He walked past the warmth and the light. He walked into the darkness of the underpass. He reached the Ford Focus. He fumbled with the keys, his fingers numb and clumsy. He dropped them in a puddle. He fell to his knees to find them. The asphalt was rough and gritty. He grasped the plastic key fob, clutching it like a lifeline. But he didn't stand up. He stayed there on his knees in the mud, and the oil huddled against the tire of a cheap rental car. He thought about the divorce papers. He remembered how proud he had been of his cruelty. "Sign it, Bella. I want out." He had wanted out of a cage only to realize the cage was actually a fortress, and he had locked himself out in the wilderness. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the wet pavement. "Bella, I'm sorry." The sound of the rain was the only answer. It washed over him, indifferent and cold, drowning out his apology just as the world had drowned out his name. Mark Sullivan climbed into the car, started the engine, and drove away. But he wasn't going anywhere. He had arrived at his destination, nowhere. And that is where we leave Mark Sullivan alone in the rain, watching the life he could have had shine brightly behind a wall of glass. It's a brutal ending, but a necessary one. Mark spent 10 years building a life based on appearances, never realizing that the foundation of that life was the woman he treated like furniture. He made the fatal mistake of confusing silence with emptiness. He didn't know that while he was busy admiring his own reflection, Bella was quietly building a rocket ship. By the time he handed her the pen, the countdown had already begun. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about recognition. It's about the danger of underestimating the people who hold your life together. Because when the quiet ones finally decide to speak, they don't scream. They just leave. And the silence they leave behind is louder than any shout. Now I have a question for you, and I want you to be honest. Do you think Bella's punishment of Mark was fair? Was the indifference at the window the perfect revenge, or was it too cruel? Let me know in the comments below. I love reading your debates. If this story gave you chills, please hit that like button. It helps the algorithm share this lesson with more people. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications. We have a new story coming next week about a billionaire who poses as a janitor to find a wife, and trust me, you don't want to miss the twist. Thanks for watching. Stay humble, and remember, never judge the driver by the car they drive. Judge them by the engine they built.